Before we start, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. Maybe you're facing a difficult decision right now and you're not sure what the right thing to do is. Maybe you're successful in business, but wondering if you're successful as a human being. Maybe you remember lessons from childhood that seemed simple then, but feel profound now that life has gotten more complicated. This conversation is for you. I want to tell you about something that happened when I was 8 years old. Something so simple that I almost forgot about it, but so powerful that it's influenced every major decision I've made since. It's a story from Sunday school told by a teacher whose name I can't even remember, but whose lesson has stayed with me for over 40 years. Most people think that the principles that guide successful people are complex strategies, sophisticated frameworks, advanced philosophies, developed through years of experience and education. And sometimes that's true. But sometimes the most powerful guidance comes from the simplest sources, from lessons we learned before we were old enough to complicate them with cynicism or self-interest. Today I'm going to tell you about that Sunday school lesson, why it hit me so hard as a child, and how it's shaped the way I think about business, relationships, and what it means to live a meaningful life. Not because I'm trying to convert anyone to religion, but because some truths are universal regardless of where you first encounter them. The lesson was about talents. Not talents in the sense of abilities or skills, but talents in the biblical sense, units of money in the parable that Jesus told about 3 servants and what they did with what their master gave them. I was sitting in a small classroom in the back of our church in Pretoria, South Africa, fidgeting in an uncomfortable wooden chair, probably thinking about the computer programming book I wanted to get back to reading. Sunday school felt like an interruption to the things I actually cared about, learning about technology, understanding how things worked, dreaming about the future. But then Mrs. Williams, our teacher, started telling this story about a master who was going on a long journey. Before he left, he called 3 of his servants and gave them money to manage while he was away. To one servant, he gave 5 talents. To another, he gave 2 talents. To the third, he gave 1 talent, each according to his ability. The first servant took his 5 talents and invested them, doubling the money. The second servant did the same with his 2 talents. But the third servant, afraid of losing what he'd been given, dug a hole and buried his single talent in the ground to keep it safe. When the master returned, he praised the first 2 servants. "Well done, good and faithful servant," he said. "You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things." But when the third servant proudly returned the original talent, explaining that he had kept it safe and hadn't lost any of it, the master was furious. "You wicked, lazy servant," he said. "You should have at least put my money in the bank so it could earn interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. As an 8-year-old, this story confused me. The third servant hadn't done anything wrong, had he? He hadn't stolen the money or wasted it. He had been careful and responsible. He had returned exactly what was given to him. Why was the master angry? Mrs. Williams saw the confusion on my face and the faces of the other children. She leaned forward and asked us a question that I've never forgotten. What do you think this story is really about? One kid said it was about money. Another said it was about being a good worker. But Mrs. Williams shook her head. This story, she said, is about what you do with what you've been given. It's about whether you use your gifts to create something good in the world or whether you hide them because you're afraid. She looked around the room at 8 confused faces and continued, "Every one of you has been given talents, not money, but abilities, opportunities, ways of thinking that are unique to you. The question isn't how many talents you have compared to someone else. The question is what you do with whatever you've been given." Then she said something that hit me like lightning. Keeping your talents safe isn't actually safe at all. If you don't use them, if you don't risk them, if you don't invest them in something bigger than yourself, you lose them anyway, and you rob the world of whatever good they could have created. I remember sitting there feeling like she was talking directly to me. Even at 8 years old, I knew I was good with computers and math and understanding how systems worked. I knew I saw patterns that other people missed. I knew I had ideas about technology and the future that excited me but seemed strange to most adults. But I also knew that being different having unusual ideas, thinking ways that other people didn't understand, all of that felt risky. It was safer to keep my head down, to focus on getting good grades in normal subjects, to not rock the boat with crazy ideas about electric cars or rockets to Mars. Mrs. Williams was telling me that safe wasn't actually safe, that hiding my abilities to avoid criticism or failure was actually the biggest failure of all, that I had a responsibility not just to myself but to the world to use whatever gifts I'd been given, even if I wasn't sure they would work, even if other people thought they were worthless. That lesson planted a seed that took years to fully grow, but it never left me. When I was deciding whether to start Zip2 instead of pursuing a traditional career path, I heard Mrs. Williams' voice asking what I was doing with what I'd been given. When I was choosing whether to bet everything on Tesla and SpaceX, I thought about the servant who buried his talent because he was afraid of losing it. Every time I've faced a major decision in my life, especially decisions that involve risk, that lesson has come back to me. Not as a religious obligation, but as a practical truth about how the world works and what makes life meaningful. When I sold PayPal for $1.5 billion, I was 31 years old with more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. I could have bought a nice house, invested conservatively, and lived comfortably forever. That would have been the safe choice. That would have been keeping my talent buried in the ground where nothing bad could happen to it. But I kept thinking about that parable. I had been given resources, connections, experience, and opportunities that most people never get. What was I supposed to do with those gifts? Was I supposed to protect them and keep them safe? Or was I supposed to risk them on something that might matter? I decided to invest almost everything in two of the most capital-intensive, regulation-heavy, failure-prone industries in the world, automotive and aerospace. People thought I was crazy. Financial advisors told me I was throwing away a fortune on impossible dreams. The media called me a rich kid playing with expensive toys. But I couldn't shake the feeling that playing it safe would be the biggest risk of all. Not financial risk, but moral risk. The risk of getting to the end of my life and realizing that I had been given extraordinary opportunities and had chosen to use them for nothing more than my own comfort. Tesla almost went bankrupt 3 times. SpaceX failed 3 rocket launches before we succeeded. I burned through my entire PayPal fortune and had to borrow money for rent. There were moments when it seemed like Mrs. Williams' lesson had led me astray, when being cautious and conventional would have been smarter. But even during the worst moments, even when failure seemed certain, I never regretted the choice to risk everything. Because the alternative, using my resources only to accumulate more resources, playing it safe while the world faced problems I might be able to help solve, felt like the kind of waste that the parable warned against. Now, 13 years later, Tesla is accelerating the world's transition to sustainable transport. SpaceX is making life multiplanetary. We've proven that private companies can revolutionize industries that seemed impossible to change. But more importantly, I've learned that Mrs. Williams was right about something deeper than business strategy. Using your talents isn't just about achieving success or making money or even changing the world. It's about becoming who you're supposed to be. It's about living up to your potential instead of hiding from it. It's about contributing something unique to the human story instead of just consuming what others have created. I think about this lesson not just in the context of business decisions, but in smaller daily choices. When I'm deciding whether to speak up about something I believe in, even if it's controversial, when I'm choosing whether to tackle a difficult technical problem or delegate it to someone else, when I'm considering whether to invest time in a relationship or project that might not work out. The question isn't always, will this succeed, or is this safe? Sometimes the more important question is this what I'm supposed to be doing with what I've been given? This doesn't mean taking stupid risks or being reckless with your resources. The servants in the parable weren't gambling. They were investing wisely. They were using their talents in ways that created value, that multiplied what they had been given, that served their master's interests. But they were willing to risk failure in service of potential success. They understood that the biggest risk wasn't losing what they had, it was never discovering what they could create. I see this principle playing out in the lives of people around me all the time. I know brilliant engineers who stay in safe corporate jobs instead of working on problems they're passionate about. I know creative people who never share their work because they're afraid of criticism. I know entrepreneurs who have good ideas but never pursue them because the risk of failure feels too big. And I understand that fear. Failure is painful. Criticism hurts. Putting yourself out there makes you vulnerable to disappointment and embarrassment. It's natural to want to protect yourself from those experiences, but I've learned that the pain of playing it safe is usually worse than the pain of taking risks. The regret of never trying is more lasting than the disappointment of trying and failing. The question, what if, haunts you longer than the answer. It didn't work. Mrs. Williams taught me that we're not just responsible for avoiding harm, we're responsible for creating good. We're not just supposed to protect what we've been given, we're supposed to multiply it. We're not just supposed to be careful, we're supposed to be faithful to our potential. This lesson has influenced how I think about raising my own children. I don't want them to be reckless or irresponsible, but I also don't want them to be so afraid of failure that they never discover what they're capable of. I want them to understand that they have gifts, different gifts, unique combinations of interests and abilities and perspectives, and that those gifts come with responsibility. Not the responsibility to succeed at everything they try, but the responsibility to try things worthy of their gifts. Not the responsibility to be perfect, but the responsibility to be authentic. Not the responsibility to please everyone, but the responsibility to contribute something meaningful to the world. I think about this when I'm hiring people for my companies. I'm not just looking for people who are competent or safe or unlikely to make mistakes. I'm looking for people who are willing to use their talents fully, who are excited about the possibility of creating something that doesn't exist yet, who understand that the biggest risk in their careers isn't failure, it's never discovering what they could accomplish if they really tried. The best employees I've ever had are people who took risks to join us, people who left stable jobs to work on electric cars when everyone thought electric cars were impossible, people who chose to work on rockets when everyone thought private space companies were fantasy, people who decided to bet their careers on visions that might not work but were worth trying. These people understood intuitively what Mrs. Williams taught me, that your talents are not just yours. They're gifts that come with obligations. Obligations to use them, to develop them, to invest them in something bigger than your own comfort or security. This doesn't mean everyone needs to start companies or change industries or take enormous public risks, but it does mean everyone needs to ask themselves honestly, what have I been given? What am I doing with it? Am I using my gifts to create value, or am I hiding them because I'm afraid? Maybe your talent is for teaching, and you're supposed to find ways to help people learn things they couldn't learn without you. Maybe your talent is for building, and you're supposed to create things that make life better for others. Maybe your talent is for understanding people, and you're supposed to help heal relationships or build communities. The specific application doesn't matter as much as the principle you have something to offer the world, something unique, something valuable, something that wouldn't exist if you didn't exist. The question is whether you're going to offer it or bury it. I know this can sound overwhelming, especially if you're not sure what your talents are or how you're supposed to use them, but the parable doesn't require you to have everything figured out immediately. It just requires you to start somewhere, to take what you have and begin investing it in something worthwhile. The servant who was given 5 talents didn't become successful because he had more to start with. He became successful because he was willing to use what he had been given. The servant who was given 2 talents received the same praise because he showed the same faithfulness with his smaller gift. Your starting point doesn't determine your ending point. Your willingness to use what you have determines your ending point. At 54, I'm more convinced than ever Mrs. Williams was right. The people who change the world who solve important problems, who create lasting value, they're not necessarily the most talented people. They're the people who are most willing to use their talents, whatever those talents might be. They're willing to risk failure in pursuit of contribution. They're willing to be criticized for trying something difficult rather than praised for doing something safe. They're willing to invest their gifts in possibilities rather than bury them in certainties. And the beautiful thing is that when you live this way, when you use your talents, instead of hiding them, you discover that you have more talents than you realized. You develop capabilities you didn't know you had. You become more than you thought you could be, not because you're trying to impress anyone or because you're driven by ego, but because you're being faithful to what you've been given, because you're fulfilling your responsibility to contribute instead of just consume. This is what I think about when I'm making decisions about how to spend my time, my energy, my resources, not what's the safest choice or what will make me look good, but what's the most faithful use of what I've been given. Sometimes that leads to choices that other people don't understand. Sometimes it leads to failure. Sometimes it leads to criticism or loneliness or financial loss. But it also leads to a kind of peace that you can't get any other way. The peace of knowing that you're not wasting your life. The peace of knowing that you're using your gifts instead of burying them. The peace of knowing that whatever happens, you're trying to be faithful to your potential instead of hiding from it. Mrs. Williams probably never knew how much that Sunday school lesson affected me. She was just a volunteer teacher trying to help a group of 8-year-olds understand an ancient story. But she gave me something that has guided me through every major decision in my life. She taught me that talents are not possessions to be protected, they're responsibilities to be fulfilled. That safety is not the absence of risk, it's the presence of purpose. That faithfulness is not about avoiding failure, it's about pursuing significance. And she taught me that the question isn't whether you have enough talents to change the world. The question is whether you're willing to use whatever talents you have to change whatever part of the world you can reach. That's enough. It's always been enough. The servant with 2 talents was praised just as highly as the servant with 5. Not because of what he had been given, but because of what he did with what he had been given. What have you been given? What are you doing with it? What are you afraid of losing that might be worth risking for something greater? The master's coming back. The question is whether he'll find you faithfully investing what you've been given or carefully protecting what you've been afraid to use. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe if these conversations help you think